All right, in this video, what we're going to do is take a look at splines. So we're going to talk about shapes, talk about some of the basic spline tools, and finish with the spline pen. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so similar kind of process to what I did previously in the polygon tools video. And we're going to start with just some basic shapes. All of these are essentially primitives, just like we had our polygon primitives. Each have their own properties, and so we won't be going through all of these, but I do want to take a look at a few of them, including, say, the rectangle. Now, you can see we have our rectangle, and just to kind of get it better fit, I'll move it down a little bit, and you have properties for things like width, things like height. You can also turn on rounding and do that to kind of bevel, chamfer, fillet, whatever you want to call it, rounding around the edges. You can also decide what plane you want this on, and this is just a little bit easier than rotating this since it allows us to keep our rotation values at 0. All right, and essentially that's it, aside from intermediate points, which is something I will talk about in a different video, but that's essentially it for our rectangle. Next up, let's take a look at the circle. Same type of thing. We're going to have some different properties here. I'm going to start by just setting the plane to XZ just to make it a little bit easier to see and work with. Once again, size properties with like the radius, but with this we can take it a bit further by making it an ellipse, which allows us a second radius property for the y-axis. And you can also make it a ring, and then you have an inner radius you can work with. And so you can do quite a bit with that. Lastly, and this one is not in our spline objects, no idea why, used to be, should be, but if you left click and hold on your text, you will have a text spline. Okay, can show you text. Once again, I'm going to kind of move it and adjust the plane here, but this allows us to create text directly inside of Cinema 4D, not having to use something like Illustrator and then bring it over. You can tell it what you want to say right there. You can choose whatever fonts you have installed on your computer, and it does work with Creative Cloud fonts. All right, alignment can be very helpful, and a lot of these are pretty basic, and I've talked about them previously, I believe, in a different video. So I really just want to skip to say the kerning options so that you can see we do have some pretty good control over this. You can move the letter left and right. You can make it taller or shorter, wider or narrower, or even just kind of move it up a bit. So that way if it's just a little bit too low, not lining up with everything else, you can very easily fix that. And so that is another one of our shapes here. With any of these shapes, whenever you're done with them and you need to do more, we can make them editable, just like we could our polygon primitives. Now, you really only want to do this if you absolutely need to. You know, if you're happy with the way the text spline looks or the circle shape looks here, no reason to do this. But if you're going to add more points, if you're going to move them around or, you know, work with the points of these shapes, then you do want to make them editable. And this is the same process as we saw with our polygon objects, which is you can either hit this make editable button or just hit C on your keyboard. Now, unlike polygon objects, there's really only one mode here we're concerned with, and that is points. That allows us access to the points where we can then move them, and we'll see how to do more with that in the next section with our spline tools. So points can either have a hard interpolation or a soft interpolation. And depending on what primitive object you create, you could have any combination of them, though usually it's one or the other. The circle is all soft interpolation. For instance, the rectangle is all hard interpolation. However, with an editable object, you can decide and make adjustments to that on your own. By selecting a point, you can then right click on it and choose hard interpolation or soft interpolation. So I'll choose hard since this one already was soft, meaning it was rounded and curved. And then by pulling that up, I can very easily make a raindrop shape. And if I decide I don't like that, then I can switch it back to soft interpolation. All right, now the interpolation changes based on the other points and the curves you have there. So just keep that in mind that it will try and change it. And once you get kind of good at understanding what Cinema 4D is trying to do, you can use that to your advantage when it comes to making other shapes. And I'll be showing that later when I talk about the pen tool. So that's hard interpolation and soft interpolation. And you can do that not just to a single point, but you could do it to all points as well. All right. Next up, we have chamfer. So let's say you forgot to round out your edges when your object was primitive, or you have a more complicated object and you want to round out one or more edges. Actually, it's not edges, it's points, but it is going to give us the same effect as, say, the bevel did in our polygon tool. So if you select 1 point or more, maybe I'll just do these 2. We can then right click and go to our chamfer. Notice a lot of these tools don't have shortcut keys, okay? There's some tools in here that are only here because they're for our polygon point mode, like weld, like optimize, things like that. So, that's why we're seeing some of these. I really wish they would kind of keep them a bit separate, but we want to find chamfer, where did it go? Right there. And this works very much like bevel. You click and drag, and it's going to round out those corners. Unlike bevel, okay, we don't have any control over the number of segments because these are splines, they're curves, and essentially the amount of curve they have is determined by those intermediate points, which we will discuss later. So you can see this is a great way to round things out. You, once again, only really get kind of like one shot. So, maybe this is the shape you want, but if you're trying to round this out, you really need to click and hold and drag until you're happy with the shape and then let go. And that's pretty much all you can do. All right. So that's chamfer, one of my favorites, very useful. Next up, we have create outline. Create outline can be helpful if you want to create an outline rather than have to pen tool this shape or duplicate it and scale it up. All right. And then connect and delete. We can do that all inside this one object. And this can be important depending on what generator you're using. If you're using the extrude, okay, and I'm going to hold down Alt or Option to put this star inside of the extrude, you can see we're getting a solid shape. If we want something a little bit closer to, say, a stroke, one of the ways you can do this, because you could also do it with the sweep generator, all right, this guy here, is by creating outlines. Going into point mode, right-clicking, okay, choosing create outline, and then clicking and dragging. Once again, kind of you have to do all of the adjustment while you have that mouse button held down. You can see I can make it smaller, can make it larger. And then if I was to throw this back into an extrude, holding down Alt or Option with the star selected when I create the extrude, you can see now we have this kind of stroke look to this. So another very useful tool. And it works great on other complex objects when you don't want to have to pen tool out something the exact same size again, or when scaling, won't work. Next up, we have line cut. So let's say we want to do some more adjustments to this. Line cut. Way to go. Very similar to our polygon line cut. You can just kind of click and drag across and it will cut wherever it intersects. Now, interestingly, it didn't do it through there. Could have something to do with the fact I wasn't in, say, a top view. So can do that. And we can try this again. All right, there we go. Now we have our 2 new points, which means I can come in here and scale these, move them, do whatever it is I need to do. Heck, maybe even come in and, where'd it go? Chamfer them again. All right. Now chamfering's great, don't get me wrong, but it can be really hard to work with after the fact. You have to be very careful with what you do with these handles. You don't want to move them. Not that I've talked about that quite yet, but save chamfer for the very, very end. Now comes a little bit of a more complicated subject. When you create a spline in Cinema 4D, all right, even one of these, say, rectangles here, all right, and then make it editable, it has close spline checked, meaning it's taking the first point and the last point and joining them together. And if you uncheck close spline, you will see that your shape is now open. And this is necessary for when we don't want a completely closed shape. If we want to use a spline as a motion path, for instance, using the align to spline tag. then we don't want a closed shape. But it also can be helpful for when we're joining shapes together to uncheck this closed spline. Okay, so let's take a look at that. Let's see, where are we? So close. I'm going to go back into point mode. And you'll see I actually have both of these shapes inside a single spline. And all I did was select both my shapes, right click, and do a connect objects delete, and it kind of combined them into a single shape like this. But what I want to do is come in here and uncheck close spline. Notice that much like that previous rectangle I had, these two ends open. Now, if you try to do this, try to close off a shape, you may run into issues if close spline is unchecked. So if I right click and find my join segment, you can see it didn't do anything because close spline is unchecked. So rather than start with join segment, let's start with break segment. I can select a point, right click and choose break segment. And then what do we see? I can even deselect here. You can see that these 2 points are no longer connected. Same with these 2 points. All right, but now what we can do is join other points together. And as we do this, we may lose some points. It's just kind of what ends up happening. But I could select, say, these 2 points, right click, and choose join segment. Okay, and I think we lost actually both those points. That's a little bit disappointing. Down there, I don't think that happened when I was going through this previously, but select both points, click join segment. All right, perfect. Okay, and that one still disappeared because it wasn't connected to anything. These two did not because, they are connected to other ones. So we could join them together now. Right click, join segment. And if I really want to kind of create a closed shape like this, not that this is the best way to do it, I can use that line cut across really quick, maybe move this up. And now what I can do is just check close spline and it'll do that last little bit for me. And what's really happening here has to do with point order. So Cinema 4D numbers these points for us, and the brighter and less saturated is 0.1. Actually, I think it starts at 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to the very end here. And like I said, it's just connecting the last of them. But the order of points can matter, especially when it comes to animation, when things are going to move from the beginning of the spline to the end of the spline. Now you can change the order a few different ways. You can select a point, right click, go to point order and choose set first point. And so I just kind of switch this. Notice now how that opening is moved. It's still from the last point to the first point. I can still get rid of it by checking close spline. However, it did change. You can also just select, I actually don't even think you need to select the point for this. Just, I do out of habit, choose reverse sequence. Okay, and now this is the first point, this is the last point. So that can come into play when you're working with animation, when you're working with sweep, when you're working with MoGraph type stuff. So it's important to keep in mind. And that brings us to the pen tool. Okay, now what I actually think is really good practice for working with the pen tool is tracing text. Not only are you going to get hard edge objects with hard points, with that hard interpolation, but you will also get some with that soft interpolation. You will get some broken handles, and it'll just give you something to trace, which I think is very helpful here. What we want to do is use our Spline pen. And you can click on this Spline pen. It's very much like the pen tool in Illustrator. In fact, in this version of Cinema 4D, they made it even more like the pen tool, which I think has kind of caused some things to work differently. I'm still trying to figure out the axis locks. They don't seem to work anymore for me. If anybody has any tips for that, please let me know, because they're very handy for more advanced stuff when moving handles in, say, a perspective view. But with my Spline pen here, I can now just click and draw out a shape. And if you've never used a pen tool before, okay, it's going to take some time to get used to, but it's nice for making custom shapes that we can then extrude. You can make your own letters. You can do whatever you want with them. Throw them, use them in sweeps, lofts, lathes, you name it. All right, actually, I've done a video on the lathe as well, I think. I made a wine glass with it. But that's essentially it for the basics of it. Click to create points. Don't create any more points than you want. You will end up with the axis at the origin. If that's a problem, just go Tools, Axis, Center Axis 2, and it'll move it to the center of our object. Okay. More complicated letters like B and C have curves. Those are going to require us to use soft interpolation. Now, technically, when I'm working with the Spline Pen, I like to just create the hard points first. And this is going to look a little bit strange if you've never used a pen tool before, but you really just want to put points in different places. Okay, so I just added in these points where I knew I was going to need them from doing this a lot. What I can do now is select these 3 points, right click, and convert them to soft interpolation, just like we did previously, okay? But now I need to work with these handles, and the way to do that is to go back into your Spline Pen, which previously you didn't have to do. Okay, I can select a point, and if I hold Shift, I will break a handle. Notice how I'm only moving one handle now, right? So I can kind of get that where I want, and then can move this out, although I really don't necessarily want to break that handle, but could do something like this. I may have actually wanted a point there. Could do the same thing here. I'm going to need to break this, so I'll hold Shift and move this. I actually don't want to break it, so I'll switch it to soft. Notice in the pen tool, if you select a point and right click, you actually get a lot of the same options and tools we were just going over. We didn't talk about delete point, but there it is. Can disconnect things, which is what we did previously. You can also switch between hard and soft tangents or interpolation. So really, we want something like this. And I do think I'm going to need to add a point, which you can do by holding down Control. So I've added a point. I can now move it. All right. And then work with the handle here. And this is what I'm talking about, trying to get it clean, try to get it consistent and match something. And that's why I like working with letters. So if you hold down Shift with a broken handle, it's going to keep the brokenness, the proportions, the distance between them, but allow you to move both handles at once. If you don't hold Shift, you will only work with one at a time. And so I would recommend just practicing, all right, with this as much as you can. And if, like I said, if you've never worked with a pen tool before, it is going to take some time to get something that, you know, matches whatever it is you're trying to work with. And that's, I think, the basic way of doing this. And honestly, how I do it. So when I show you this next way, I'm not going to be quite as good because I don't use it all that much. This is a bit simpler, so we'll see. Okay. Oh, so we'll see. All right. Going to start here, and you can click and drag as you're going to create those soft interpolated points. And so that can help speed up what you're doing because you don't have to, and I didn't click and drag there, so I made a mistake. No, maybe I didn't need to. You can get a lot of that work out of the way without having to switch all the points after and you know, make adjustments after the fact. So trying this again, it's actually really surprising myself. Now watch this. I'm going to show you a little different tip here that could work. I'm going to do hard interpolation there and close this. All right, and actually did pretty good. I'm going to select this point and I'm going to chamfer it. And that's probably going to match up pretty darn well. So, you know, I end up with the same kind of point structure, right? One at each straight part, the curve in between. Honestly, not too bad. So pulling out the points while you're creating it is kind of the next step in terms of the level of difficulty. I don't think the D is going to show what I want. Actually, none of these do. But let me just show you one other kind of aspect of working with the pen tool. Because we haven't even gotten into handles yet, but when creating points, not only can you drag out handles, you can break handles if you hold Shift. Okay, so if you hold Shift and you can, if you don't click or let go, you can undo it. But if I hold Shift, I can break it and drag out another one. drag out another one, break it, and kind of go on my way. Not that I have any idea what shape I'm making here. So that's the other part of this that allows you to really try and get your shape on the first go around. My thing is, I rarely get it correct on the first go around. I'm gonna have to go make adjustments anyway. So what difference does it make if I get it, if I do those adjustments, you know, at the end after I've created the shape? Now, one thing we haven't talked about is working with handles. I have a little bit with these, but it is important when working with these handles to be in an orthographic view, like a top, like a front, right, whatever. You really don't want to be in a perspective view if you can avoid it, and here's why. All right. So I'm going to come in here and move a handle, and what you're going to see is I am moving it in 3 directions. If you look over at my top view, you will see I'm moving it on the Z-axis. Okay. I'm moving it on the X-axis. And if you look at my right view, you can see that things are moving up and down. And that's really what these locks were supposed to control and worked previously. So it would allow you to stop from moving on the Y-axis. All right. But you can see it's not working. And that's what I'm struggling with, and why I would recommend it not working in your perspective view unless you absolutely have to. There are times when you want to make more complex 3D splines that you have to use your perspective view, but not being able to lock them is really, really unfortunate, or at least me not being familiar with how to lock them in this new version is very, very unfortunate, because I'm not seeing it work like it used to. So I'm still doing research on that. Like I said, if anybody has any ideas or has figured that out, please let me know. But that's the basics of the pen tool. And, you know, trace a whole bunch of letters, and by the time you get through the alphabet, you should be pretty good with it. So that will do it for this video. Let me know if there's anything else you want to see, and take care.